I guess like my question would be to you, what do you think happened in the West that created these kind of schisms, let's say, in terms of esotericism, but also in terms of even the definition of magic as it came to be in the early modern era?
I think it's intertwined a lot with civics and deals with more secular authorities too. There was an interesting schism actually between the Catholic and Protestant groups in terms of the burning times, in terms of persecuting people for folk magic or herbalism or whatever. The Catholics had a caveat. Well, if you can establish that it's just white magic, you're just healing people, you know, you're not causing abortions and you're not doing black magic. They weren't burned at the stake or drowned or anything. In the Protestant tradition, a la King James Demonology, of course, which you probably read, they didn't care if you were doing any folk magic and it wasn't explicitly canonical, explicitly uber Christian, you were a witch anyway and would get killed for that.
Yeah, and so do you think it has also to do with the kind of burgeoning of scientism that happened at that time? Because a lot of people tend to. This is one of the things I always face is people tell me, you know, the medieval witch burnings. I'm like, medieval witch burnings? Like witch burnings are early modern, all the way up into the
Renaissance era. Yeah,
exactly. And so there's this birth of the scientific mind, which wants to categorize things in terms of technical and in terms of quantitative things. And so they face these practices which are different, let's say, and that are more related to spiritual influence, you could say, or influence of the person that is performing the remedy, and they don't know what to do with it. So it's like it doesn't fit in this kind of like Enlightenment version of Christianity.
Yeah, and the really weird part is that the Middle Ages were less persecutory in some ways than the Renaissance, and everyone says, well, things got better during the Renaissance. Everything was science and technology, clockwork mainly, and actually in the Middle Ages there was less of that. I edited another work recently on medieval medicine, and one of the main things discussed is in the Renaissance, you have sort of a reversion to the more antiquated notion that sickness was invariably spiritual in nature. Whereas in the Middle Ages, there was at least some attempt to say, well, yes, I believe in demons and demons of sickness are definitely causing problems, but also, you know, you've got these humors and it's not necessarily a demon. Maybe you just ate the wrong food. They didn't have germ theory, but they had a basic concept of the transmissibility of disease, and it almost disappears actually later on. It's almost strange how there was a retrogression in medicine.
There's also one of the interesting things that I discovered was that obviously in the Roman times, there was a kind of witch burning that was popular. Yeah. And then Charlemagne actually was one of the people that banned the burning of witches. So he said, you know, like the witches don't exist, basically, is what he was saying. Like, this is just like, you know, let's not bother people with this. And then it came back, like you said, towards the late Middle Ages and ultimately, especially during the Renaissance and kind of in these weird kind of witch scares and werewolf scares that happened at that time.
Oh yeah, werewolves is another funny thing. The Babylonians used to do that. They used to have specifically like medicine men, you could call them. They were intertwined with the priesthood, actually, that would dispense little spells and give people like little items to put next to their door to keep witches away, led by Lilitu, actually. They're sort of a queen of the damned, if you will, that informs Lilith later on in Judeo-Christian tradition. And it's actually funny because they imagine that this horde of demons went out at night along with the transients and pickpockets and prostitutes, actually, and they were sort of all lumped together, and they would get paid to have protective spells and incantations against them. And it's funny because in the Middle Ages, you see less of that. I've edited grimoires, and most of them, they're not from the Middle Ages, they're from the Renaissance or even the Enlightenment. And there is where you get some of the classical sort of takes on witchcraft, miasmus and stuff, like burning a wolf's skull with herbs in it at the edge of the village to keep the plague away and things like that, even though the Black Death predates that by many centuries.
One of the things that I'm curious about, because I talked about this with a professor of Byzantine studies, and I was trying to understand, because a lot of the texts that informed the Renaissance magic, some of them obviously came from Spain, but many of them came from Constantinople. As Constantinople was kind of taken by the Muslims, a lot of the scholars left Constantinople for the West. For like the Corpus Hermeticum was preserved in Constantinople, basically. But there it didn't seem to have the same effect. And so we were trying to figure out, like in Constantinople towards the end, there were all these Neoplatonists, there were the Hermeticists, and they were all there. But it didn't create this schism, which we see happening in the West as modernism kind of sets itself up.
It could have been like a neo-Roman appreciation for the compilation of knowledge sort of thing. Like just having the material there was considered comfy and enlightening. Just having access to it, maybe more than an actual sub-movement, maybe.
Yeah, but I think there were people that were practicing and reading it. It just wasn't, it didn't create a kind of social disruption as it did, as it moved into Italy, let's say. And you see Boccaccio and all these people kind of taking it up. Anyway, so to me, it's curious. Like I'm trying to figure, I'm a Western person, right? And so I'm always trying to figure out what is it that happened in the West so that you come to the 18th century, 19th century, and you have these like these Freemasons and these Rosicrucians or whatever. And then you have popular culture, and what broke? Like, how is it that these things became so separated?